Sophia stood in the kitchen, her gaze fixed on the floor, while Isabella, her stepmother, paced back and forth, her footsteps echoing through the silent house. The shouting came like whips, each word dripping with resentment as Isabella hurled them at her. Ever since her mother's death, things had only gotten worse. Isabella had never hidden the disdain she felt for Sophia, and Sophia, weary of the arguments, responded with silence, carrying a pain that only she knew how to bear. "You're ungrateful, Sophia," Isabella barked, her eyes blazing with anger. "You have no respect for me, and I'll teach you to have some." Sophia swallowed hard. She knew that nothing she said would change what was about to happen. It was always the same: arguments, accusations, punishments. But this time felt different. Isabella was even angrier, her face flushed, her fists clenched. "Enough! I know what I'm going to do with you." Without another word, Isabella grabbed Sophia's arm tightly, dragging her through the house toward the basement door. Sophia resisted for a moment, her pulse racing, but Isabella was stronger and determined. The creak of the basement door echoed through the house like a dark omen. "You'll stay here until you learn to respect me." Isabella shoved her inside. The cold, damp floor of the basement made Sophia shrink back. When she heard the door slam shut, her heart sank. Darkness enveloped her, and the silence was suffocating. The musty smell and stale air filled her lungs as her eyes tried to adjust to the dark. Trembling, Sophia felt along the walls, trying to make sense of where she was, when something, in the far corner of the basement, made a strange noise. Something she never imagined she'd find. The air in the basement was thick, heavy with the scent of old dust, and something deeper, something that made the hairs on the back of Sophia's neck stand up. She slid her hand along the damp wall, her fingers slipping over the mold. Every step echoed in the dark space, but the sound did nothing to ease the feeling of confinement. The ceiling seemed to close in on her, and her heart pounded, matching the rhythm of her shallow breaths. She crouched beside a pile of old boxes, curious but hesitant. Time seemed to have stopped there, the boxes covered in a thick layer of dust, as if no one had touched them in decades. When she opened them, she found old wooden toys, children's clothes, and faded photographs. The image of a smiling child stared back at her from a yellowed photo, but Sophia didn't recognize anyone. Who were these people? Why were their belongings here? Suddenly, a noise. Something moved in the back of the basement. Sophia froze, fear crawling up her spine. Her wide eyes tried to pierce the darkness, but all she saw was a vague shadow, a shape that seemed to move slowly and silently. She backed up, stumbling over something behind her. The basement felt alive, as if it were waiting, watching her every move. The sense that something or someone was with her in the dark grew stronger. The air around her felt heavier, almost suffocating. She wasn't alone. Something sinister was lurking. With her heart still racing, Sophia searched for something to distract her from the eerie feeling of being watched. Her eyes fell on a small wooden box in the corner of the basement. It was old, carved with symbols she didn't recognize, but something about it drew her in. With trembling hands, she opened the lid. She opened. Inside, covered by a fine layer of dust, was a leather-bound journal worn with age. The edges of the yellowed pages were fragile, as if they might crumble at a touch. On the cover, written in an old-fashioned script, were the words, "Secrets of the Velasquez Family." The name sounded vaguely familiar. Sophia hesitated for a moment, but her curiosity outweighed her fear. Opening the journal, the first page was written in delicate, fine handwriting. August 13th, 1920. The date made her heart race. There was something mysterious about such an old diary. She began to read. "My dear Isabella has been overtaken by a rage I have never seen before. Something has changed within her, something dark, and I fear what she might do." The basement. That's where it all began. Sophia felt a chill run down her spine. The mention of her stepmother's name in the basement made her uneasy. She turned the page, feeling drawn to uncover more secrets. What she hid down there. "I'm not sure if I can bear what is coming." Each line was more disturbing than the last, as though the old family secrets were intertwining with her present. With every page she turned, the basement seemed to come more alive around her, as if the walls themselves were whispering the words along with her. The pages trembled in Sophia's hands, not from her movements but from the growing tension in her body. The air in the basement felt thicker, almost tangible. As she read the words in the journal, a faint sound broke the silence, a whisper, barely audible. Sophia froze. She held her breath, her eyes wide, waiting to hear it again. And there it was, faint, distant, but undeniably real. It was as if someone was murmuring her name, or maybe it wasn't her name, but voices tangled together in an indecipherable chorus. The sound echoed off the damp walls, filling the space with an eerie vibration. Sophia glanced around, the darkness seeming more oppressive now. With the journal still in her hands, she slowly stood up, her bare feet touching the cold floor. Each step echoed back to her, as if something were following her movements. The feeling of being watched intensified. The whisper turned into a constant noise, filling her head, sending chills down her spine. She turned toward the source of the sound, her eyes trying to pierce through the darkness. There was something there, in the shadow, something moving. Her rational mind told her it was impossible, but instinct said otherwise. "Who's there?" Her voice came out weaker than she expected. No answer, just the persistent whisper, now closer. Fear was growing in her chest, and she knew she needed to find out what was hiding in the basement's shadows, before it was too late. Sophia sat back down on the floor, the diary still in her trembling hands. Her eyes scanned the old lines, the nearly faded words, written by someone who seemed to be speaking directly to her. The story that unfolded before her eyes made her blood run cold. Years ago, someone had been locked in that same basement. It wasn't a simple punishment, it was a cruel sentence. The diary spoke of a young girl, not much different from Sophia, who had been confined there for reasons the text hinted at but didn't fully explain. The pages, yellowed with age, narrated the suffering of the prisoner. Feelings of abandonment, fear, and despair poured from the words, written in a hurried, nervous script. "She's hiding something from me," Sophia muttered, clutching the diary against her chest. The feeling that the past and the present were intertwining grew stronger in her mind. Her stepmother, Isabella, had always been strict, controlling, but now something darker seemed to surround her. The silence at home, the cold stares, the evasive answers, it all seemed to align in a web of secrets. Doubt began to eat away at Sophia. Could her stepmother know about this story? Could it be that the punishment in the basement wasn't just a simple penalty? The whispers she had heard seemed to carry memories that time had tried to bury. But why now? Why was it all resurfacing? The diary spoke of betrayal, of broken promises. And now, trapped in the same place, Sophia wondered what else had been hidden, what else her stepmother was keeping from her. Sophia slid her hand along the cold wall of the basement, following an instinct that guided her. Something wasn't right, as if the place held more than just darkness and dust. Her hesitant fingers stopped when they felt a slight irregularity, a small, almost imperceptible crack. With a push, part of the wall shifted, revealing a narrow passage that had been hidden for years. The sound of stone grinding echoed through the basement, amplifying the mystery that surrounded the place. The darkness beyond the opening was suffocating, but Sophia, her heart pounding, forced herself to move forward. As she passed through the passage, a hidden room was revealed. The smell of dampness and mold was almost unbearable, but what caught her attention was what stood in the center of the small room: a rusted iron bed, heavy chains hanging from the walls. This wasn't an ordinary room. It was a cell. Panic crawled up Sophia's spine. Who had been kept there, and why? She approached the bed, noticing scratch marks on the floor, as if someone had desperately tried to escape. An old doll, tossed in a corner, seemed to be the only silent witness to the torment. Sophia backed away, feeling the weight of the truths beginning to unravel. Someone had been imprisoned there, in suffocating isolation, and now she was closer than ever to discovering what had really happened in that forgotten basement. As Sophia stepped away from the iron bed, something on the floor caught her attention. An old photograph, yellowed with age. With trembling hands, she picked it up and recognized the face of a young girl who looked a lot like her. But that was impossible. This girl seemed to have lived long ago. On the back of the photo, an inscription read, Helena, 1932. The name echoed in Sophia's mind. Helena was her grandmother's name, someone she had barely heard about. Her stepmother, Isabella, never spoke of the family's past. Sophia was beginning to understand why. The feeling that something terrible was rooted in those walls became more and more palpable. The diary she had found earlier now made more sense. The note spoke of a young girl locked in the basement as punishment for something she never did. The descriptions were cruel, and each word seemed to connect to what Sophia was experiencing now. It was as if history was repeating itself. Sophia felt the weight of the past fall on her shoulders. There were secrets her family should never have kept, shadows that should never have been forgotten. What had been done to her grandmother was now echoing in her own life, like a curse passed down through generations. Her heart raced, and the air in the basement felt heavier. The voices that once whispered now took shape in her mind. The past was coming back to haunt her. Who was her stepmother, really? And why was she repeating the mistakes of decades ago? Sophia knew she had to confront Isabella, but first, she needed to understand how much of the past still lived in the shadows of that house. Sophia held the diary in her trembling hands, unable to believe what she had just read. Among the yellowed pages, her mother's name appeared unexpectedly, like a whisper from the past, suddenly shouting for attention. She reread the lines, hoping her eyes were deceiving her. But there it was. Mariana was a threat to the secrets of this house. Sophia's heart pounded erratically. Her mother, who had always been a figure of love and protection, now seemed entangled in something terribly dark. The diary revealed gruesome details, not just about the basement, but about the family itself. Isabella, her stepmother, seemed to be only the tip of an iceberg of something much deeper and more disturbing. She began connecting the dots. Her mother's sudden death, the secrets that always surrounded her, Isabella's increasingly harsh and aggressive behavior. None of this was a coincidence. There was something dark that her family had been hiding for generations, and now Sophia was beginning to understand that the truth was more terrifying than any nightmare she had ever had. Her mother's name was etched among tales of rituals, lies, and betrayals. And the most frightening part, the diary hinted that Mariana herself, her mother, had been targeted by the same forces that now seemed to surround Sophia. The basement wasn't just a place of punishment. It was a symbol, a space where family secrets were buried, along with the souls of those who dared to challenge the order. Sophia's mind whirled in a storm of emotions. She felt betrayed, lost, and at the same time determined. What was Isabella hiding, and why had her mother never told her the truth? The only certainty Sophia had at that moment was that the shadows of the past could no longer be ignored. They were alive, and now she would have to face them. Sophia climbed the basement stairs with clenched fists, the diary pressed against her chest. With each step, the weight of the truth seemed to grow heavier. By the time she reached the top, her heart was racing, but she was ready. The smell of the house, familiar but now tainted by secrets, surrounded her as she crossed the hallway toward the room where Isabella was. Her stepmother, sitting in the armchair with her usual air of superiority, didn't even look at Sophia as she saw her enter. "What do you want now?" she asked with disdain, without raising her eyes. "I know what you did," Sophia shot back, her voice firm, surprising even herself. Isabella slowly lifted her eyes, her defiant expression turning into a mask of calculated coldness. "I don't know what you're talking about," Isabella replied, emotionless. But Sophia was no longer the frightened girl she used to intimidate. "My mother, the basement, the diary, you can't hide this from me anymore." Isabella's face twisted briefly, showing something between anger and fear. But she quickly composed herself, trying to maintain her facade. "You don't understand anything, Sophia. These are old stories, things that don't concern you." "They have everything to do with me," My mother died because of these secrets, and you're involved." The silence that followed was deafening. For a moment, Sophia thought Isabella would attack her, but instead, her stepmother stood up slowly, her dark eyes filled with a veiled threat. "You don't know what you're dealing with, girl. Some truths should remain buried." But Sophia didn't back down. This time, she wouldn't let the truth be buried along with her mother. Isabella moved toward Sophia, her eyes burning with rage. "You're not going anywhere," she hissed. Sophia's momentary panic quickly turned into determination. She knew she couldn't stay in that house, not after everything she had discovered. As Isabella approached, Sophia took a few steps back, looking for something, anything she could use. Her eyes landed on a small table with a lit candle. Suddenly, an idea flashed through her mind. In a quick movement, she grabbed the candle and threw the holder to the floor, scattering fire and shards across the room. Isabella instinctively stepped back, surprised. "You're crazy!" her stepmother screamed, trying to regain control, but the fire had already started to spread across the old carpet. Sophia saw her chance. Taking advantage of the distraction, she ran toward the front door. Isabella's footsteps followed closely behind, but she didn't allow herself to look back. The heavy air of the house seemed to try to hold her back, as if the very secrets hidden there didn't want to let her go. With trembling hands, Sophia opened the wooden door and ran outside, the cold night air filling her lungs. Her ragged breathing mixed with the distant sound of the flames spreading inside the house. She kept running, not stopping, not looking back, until the silhouette of the house disappeared into the darkness. Finally, Sophia was free. The soft dawn breeze caressed her face as she walked along the dirt road, her steps steady but slow. The silence around her was interrupted only by the sound of her controlled breathing and the distant echo of the house she had left behind. As she walked, her mind replayed every detail of the past few hours. The terrifying revelations in the diary, the secret about her mother, and what Isabella had done. All of it had haunted her for years, without her even knowing. But now, everything was clear, and with that clarity came the weight of a new freedom, a freedom she barely knew how to handle. Sophia stopped, looking toward the horizon, where the sky was beginning to glow in shades of orange and pink. The dawn of a new day, a new beginning. For the first time, she felt that the past, which had bound her in silence and shadows, no longer controlled her. Isabella, the house, the basement, none of that had power over her anymore. An unexpected sense of peace washed over her. She knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but there was a strength inside her now that she had never felt before. The weight of the past was starting to fade, replaced by the promise of what was to come. Sophia smiled to herself. She was finally free. Did you like the story? Comment below what you thought of this story, and don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel and press the bell icon so you don't miss any stories like this.